The odd-numbered games in the Street Fighter franchise are cursed. We explore why these games have had bad luck and bad decisions associated with them, and then we also get into why the even-numbered games have been such a success. We're going to talk about curses today. And if you don't think curses are real, you have not been paying attention, because all of the odd Street Fighter games, odd numbered ones, are cursed.
I gotta say, I can't confirm this, but I have heard that if you watch too many YouTube videos without liking, commenting, and subscribing, you can get cursed. Not my words, I've heard. Yeah. So
you better punch
maybe...
that thumbs up button. Yeah, because if you don't, the curse is on the way. And the curse might look something like this, because Street Fighter 1, John, it was a reasonable success. And yes, it was successful enough to spawn a sequel, but the game was still cursed because, well, it's totally normal for you or your opponent to get bloody in a fighting game. In a fighting game, that happens all the time. It's not normal for you yourself as a human person playing it to get bloody playing the game. Mm-hmm. And that's actually what happened with Street Fighter 1. With the pressure-sensitive buttons, players were hitting them so hard, they were making their own fist bloody. And if I've ever heard of a cursed game, that would be it. A video game that makes you bloody and injures you, that was actually Street Fighter 1. And that birthed the 6-button format that we know and love so much, light, medium, heavy, right? Mm-hmm. Like that birthed that's what they changed it to. But initially, this game made people bloody.
And you know, Capcom, bless their hearts, they were trying at the time. I don't know all the details from this, but I've certainly read about it a handful of times and heard people talk about the days of Street Fighter 1. They were trying to do something new in the arcades, right? They wanted an arcade cabinet that would stand out from everything else, and so they had these giant ones with these pressure-sensitive buttons. They looked very different, and as from what I remember, they were much more expensive to create, and I think they only made like 1,000 of them or something like that.
Yeah.
It was 1987, and man, just technology was more in the exploratory realm when it came to ergonomics and such. And yeah, hitting those buttons. Street Fighter 1 is known for not having easy execution, even just on modern controllers and joysticks and whatnot. But imagine trying to get stuff done on those wonky, pressure-sensitive giant buttons. I do not envy them. I'm glad I jumped in when I did, and it wasn't in 1987 when I was -1.
So, Street Fighter 1, well documented the curse there. Street Fighter 3 is also cursed because when they released it, it ended the franchise for almost 10 years. One of the most popular franchises in all the video games, and Capcom did Street Fighter 3 and said, we're good, for nearly a decade. The producer of Street Fighter 2 didn't even want to make Street Fighter 3. He wanted to do a whole new game, and Capcom just assumed he'd be all over making the third entry. That was not the case. He didn't want to do it. Like, it was such a big act to follow coming in after 2. Then, of course, Street Fighter 3 is released in 1997, and the biggest fans of the franchise said it was boring and they didn't want to play it. While Street Fighter 3 is beloved now by hardcore fans, this was the most unsuccessful version of a core Street Fighter game we've ever seen. That is how come this game is also cursed.
It is both extremes, right? Simultaneously, because in the niche, it's regarded as maybe the best fighting game of all time. And I don't disagree in a lot of ways. Like, I feel the fun, even if I can't necessarily articulate it right away, when I sit down to play Street Fighter 3 at the level that I play it, which is by no means professional, right? But I can still feel like why this would be fun, and I can see why further exploring the system of parries and, all the mechanics and functions that come together to make that game would be exciting and fun. And then the hype that comes out of some of the professional play of that, it's all but guaranteed every round. Like, that's a fun game to watch. But you're right, commercially speaking, that it didn't have enough clickbait. It didn't smell good enough on the outside. Something didn't get people in the door or didn't keep them around. And there's one thing that I see as a consistency between both of these cursed games so far, and it's that there's a particular character that's not playable in either game. Can you guess who she is?
Not offhand.
It's your favorite character.
Oh, it's Rose, huh? Yeah.
No. No, it's not what I was going to get at. But that's fine,
Cammy?
Maybe she's the key for a successful Street Fighter.
Huh? Well, speaking of Cammy, this next game actually had her as a launch character, But speaking of launching, it probably had the worst one ever for a Capcom fighting game, and that would be Street Fighter V. Reviews were mixed initially, but the game never rose up to the same levels as its competitors in the same space, with titles like Mortal Kombat 11 having 12 million in sales, Tekken 7 having 7 million, and Smash Ultimate with a crazy 27 million copies sold. Street Fighter V had 6 million, trailed all of those games, and this is the granddaddy of fighting games. This is a big one. So we had technical issues like rootkits, input delay, and as you said many times and said so very well, this game had little to no charisma, and man, is that so well said. It's actually a great game in my opinion. I love this game. It's absolutely terrific, but despite how I feel, it's not how most gamers currently think about this title. They're waiting for Street Fighter 6, which I'll note is an even-numbered game. That is why the curse of the odd-number games is so terrible. Street Fighter 5 is good. It's a great game, but no one could love it because it is actually cursed because it ends in an odd number.
Well, every game, every entry has like its problems, and you could point to, right? Like, and Street Fighter V certainly started with them, and it's not my favorite in the franchise. It's grown on me since where it has been, but I don't disagree with calling it cursed in some ways. Although I do want to go back to something you said, that it's the worst release in Capcom fighting game history. Is that what you said?
Probably the worst launch in fighting game history that Capcom has ever done. Now, Infinite and Street Fighter Cross Tekken, they might beg to differ, but at least in the core series, it's definitely the worst launch we've ever seen. If you start counting the crossover games and other stuff, maybe you can find one, but
yeah,
it sounds
fair
like you beg
enough.
to differ. Yeah.
Well, no, I just don't want to not bring up Marvel Infinite. After that statement, just to because I think some people are going to be, well, what about Marvel Infinite? And
Yeah.
can you qualify that? And I mean, whatever, sure, they were both really bad, and one ended a franchise, at least for the time being. The other one curiously did not, and maybe that just speaks to the staying power of Street Fighter. I don't know. That's something that we've explored to an extent, especially a couple of years ago when we were going through it. But Street Fighter survived.
You remember that statement, John? We're like, this game is too big to fail, and it kind of was. Even despite the curse, despite everything, we're like, this game is just going to hold on because it kind of has to.
Yeah,
And,
but that didn't happen in Super Smash Bros., which I would argue, even in the days of Brawl, was a bigger. I don't know if it's more prominent, but it's in more households. More people are gonna buy Super Smash Bros. For more reasons, which is why you've got 12 million in sales for, Ultimate. But I don't know. But yes, Street Fighter V, as suffering some curse. I would say though less so. I think Street Fighter V is the best performing odd numbered Street Fighter for what that's worth. And I would say that we're in a decent place of momentum here at the end of it. And I guess Street Fighter 1 would have had that, and Street Fighter 3 certainly did not. It marked the beginning of a dark age for the franchise. But I would still say 5 is cursed.
Yeah. And then we get to the alpha games, and this actually still works there.
Does it apply to the sub games? Like Alpha 1 is bad, Alpha 2 is great, Alpha 3 sucks?
Well, exactly. Actually, so 1 was considered okay at the time, but it's the least played and least well thought of entry in the entire franchise currently. Most people would have Alpha 1 as their worst Street Fighter game in the core series, and it's kind of not really. I mean, some people might like it, but the game is so watered down, and yeah. Yeah, okay. So maybe Street Fighter 1 is worse. It kind of depends on what people kind of look at it but Alpha 1 is just, it was not really well done. And then there's Alpha 3, and that didn't even last that long as a competitive game, with many people actually preferring to go back and play its predecessor, Alpha 2. And so even in this day and age, when people play, Alpha in tournaments, they play Alpha 2. They actually go back to the original. So 1 and 3, yet again, cursed. And it's a funny thing. It's like, wow, how does this keep happening? And actually, John, what I'm proposing here is that Capcom actually needs to skip Street Fighter 7 and go right to 8.
Talk to Microsoft about numerical naming conventions, right? And how do we skip 7 and get right to 8, or just an even number? I don't care. Street Fighter 360. Okay, and here's something interesting. It's a little off topic, but it's in my mind and in my heart, so I'm going to bring it up here. So we sometimes when games are unsuccessful, people have gone back to the previous one that worked, right? And as you're saying, with Alpha 3 back to Alpha 2, and as we just kind of noted too, when Brawl came out, people were like, I'm just going to go back to Melee and make Project M or whatever, right? it's interesting to me with how much momentum Street Fighter 4 had, and then how crappy Street Fighter 5's launch was, and how like it really was going with the emergency brake on for the first few years. People didn't go back to 4, even though they were like still willing to play it at the time. They were like, we'll do it simultaneously. There was still a fervor for the game. It's crazy to me considering the other examples that didn't happen with 5. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of reasons for that. The Pro Tour being what it is and stuff like that. Most people wanting to, go to the next thing. It's rare in Street Fighter for that to happen, where the next game comes out and people go back and stay with the old one. It does happen. Like there's a small pack of people that do that. Happened with Street Fighter 3 and Street Fighter 4, and same with 4 and 5, but not many.
Well, not on the overall,
Exactly.
majority level.
Not like it happened like with Brawl, where everyone was just stuck with Melee and still has, kind of thing. Like Brawl is just so hated because of the tripping mechanic and other things. But yeah, so it's an interesting thing. It's quite unique for the Street Fighter franchise. I don't think other franchise deals with the odd number curse. But going into the actual good games now that people love, Street Fighter 2 was a huge phenomenon. It changed gaming as we know it. It is one of the most successful video games of all time. One of the best ever. Like when you're making a top 10 list or anything like that, like not having Street Fighter 2 in there, like most people like consider that just a faulty list at that point. And then we get into Street Fighter 4, which is another gigantic success, which completely revitalized fighting games and the competitive scene, taking us to new heights we'd never ever seen before.
You need to stop right now, because you are just setting us up for so much disappointment with Street Fighter 6. I'm like, oh my gosh, are we about to enter a new golden age? What's on the horizon for us now? I'm like,
John, it's only the odd number games that are cursed. The even ones are perfect.
I know, but now I'm like, oh my gosh, let us know if you're terrified now for Street Fighter 6, or you think that it's going to revolutionize the series in a way similar that 2 or 4 did, because you're not wrong. Like 2 did what it did. I don't have to tell anybody that. And 4 launched us into a golden age, not only for the franchise itself, but like other games were able to then ride that wave. It was so successful that, Tekken, which never went away. Tekken has been consistent through the years. I don't think it's had much of a dark period at all. Certainly not like Street Fighter has. And it was, still around and such, but like I think games like Tekken and Mortal Kombat and others benefited directly from Street Fighter 4's boom. And then of course Marvel versus Capcom, but it was sort of responsible for that boom as well, at least in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, Tekken had a little bit of a dark period, but as you say, Street Fighter 4 brought it all back. But the funny thing about this odd and even thing, it actually mirrors the original Star Trek movies. This is the one with William Shatner and all those other stuff. And I'm talking about the movies here. The odd numbered entries are considered quite a bit worse than the even numbered entries.
Is Wrath of Khan even?
Wrath of Khan is even. The
right.
Voyage Home, Final Frontier, like all those ones are the even numbered ones. And then Final Frontier is number 5 actually, so I'm thinking of the Undiscovered Country. Sorry, that one's number 6.
I was going to call
Frontier,
you on that, you nerd.
Final Frontier, Search for Spock, and then the original Star Trek movie, which is one of the most boring and crappy movies and features Spock crying randomly because something died in like outer space, and he's like, that's too much for me. I've got to shed some tears.
Now hopefully does this include the Next Generation series movies, or
no? I haven't looked that far into it. I'm only so much of a Star Trek nerd, so I stick with the originals.
Tune in next week to hear our Star Trek selection for the Street Fighter 6 launch roster. Worf, are you kidding? Worf, some Borg.
I got to get Geordi
number
in there,
2.
I want
Geordi
Geordi
was
in
my
there.
favorite. Geordi was my favorite character as a kid.